Yes, welcome back to the Magic Sponge podcast, a miracle cure for all your rugby league injury issues. I'm Brian Sini. Most of you know me as the guy behind NRL Physio and all the stuff you see on social media. I've got my co-host, James. He's a physio, big footy head. James, you're here on a Sunday night. We've toughed it out as solo parents this weekend. Our lovely wives had mum's magic round, so they went off for a nice weekend away. How are you travelling, mate? Have you, got through the weekend okay?
Yep, survived the weekend, Brian. We're here to tell the story valiantly and heroically. I've actually been demoted outside, so it looks like I'm sitting under a very, very bright sun at the moment. I'm in my outdoor area with my barbecue behind me, Brian. So I'm just enjoying the cool winter nights in my puffy vest, which is very unusual for Queensland winter to wear a puffy vest. It doesn't often get a run for me, hey?
Mate, it is cold tonight. I'm rugged up in my in the warmest of gear that I have, my lovely retro Dolphins kit.
Of course.
Can't go away from that on a cold night. But look, let's get into it now. Tonight we want to talk about. We've got the best rugby league fantasy competition is back. Bundy, the NRL, and the NRLW are back with the world's first mixed gender fantasy league. I know many of you listening consider yourselves high-level fantasy players. Well, this is really going to test your skill with the stars of the women's game able to be selected for the first time alongside the men. It's a really great way to elevate the women's game. As we all know, fantasy sports drives a significant amount of interest in rugby league, and with the rapid growth of the NRLW, this is the perfect combo. James and I consider ourselves pretty gun fantasy players and big fans of the women's game. So make sure you head to mixer.nrl.com to take us on and enter the special league code for the Magic Sponge listeners, which is FUHV1MWR. Or head to the link in the podcast description or any of my socials. Take us on. We are loving it so far. Game week 1 done. Plenty of prizes on offer. James, how good is it to have the mixer on board again this year?
It's so good, Brian. We talk about the three things that we love dearly in our life, and that's the NRL, the NRLW, and Bundaberg rum. And you combine all three and you get a very, very good time. So it's very exciting to be back in the mixer again. We'll be talking about that week in and week out. Obviously, we'll drop the link to the mixer in the podcast notes as well, so people can get around us and we in turn will get around them.
Love it, mate. And we will run through how our teams have gone in game week 1 later in the show and talk about our expert picks for game week 2, which will be great. But as always, guys, this is your one-stop shop for all things injury analysis in the NRL. We talk about the injuries from the round just gone, guys in the rehab ward, going through their injury rehab at the moment. We talk about their return to play, their return to performance, but also how it will implicate on their fantasy and Supercoach scoring, which is the big thing for you guys listening. We're down to the pointy end. We need every little edge that we can get. And this podcast and also patreon.com/NRL Physio will give you an edge in terms of injuries. Head on over there. We've got our casualty ward there. We also answer plenty of questions during the week. Lots of write-ups. We had write-ups on Latrell and Cleary from the week just gone to, give people guidance on those kind of situations. So, yeah, patreon.com/NRL Physio if you want any further information. But otherwise, let's get into the injuries from round 21.
I don't know exactly what he's done. I would have thought it was an ankle, but I'm just guessing.
He shouldn't be out for a long period of time. I mean, I'm no doctor. We have to wait for the scans, obviously, but that'd be more positive than negative.
To kick off round 21, Brian, we had the Dragons v the Tigers. Only injury concern out of this game was to Sean Blore with a reported quad strain. He was ruled out pre-game, wasn't he?
Yeah, so apparently he was dealing with it leading into sort of the game. He'd suffered or had something during the week that he'd been pushing and he really wanted to play, so he pushed and pushed, but it just went on him again in the warm-up. Now, there's no suggestion that he's, completely torn it or anything like that. By all accounts, it was just another, he's tweaked it again, and because it was in the warm-up, he couldn't really, freshen up for the game. So you're usually looking at 1 to 2 weeks missed for those kind of things, so whether he'll be right after missing just, the week just gone. But especially because it's like an aggravation, I wouldn't be surprised if he needs to miss next week just to let it settle down.
Yeah, I don't think there'd be anything else to add on top of that, Brian. We might move on to the Warriors v the Raiders. Just a bit more Sean Johnson stuff, just if you don't mind, just racking up Dally M votes once again. So injury concerns out of this one, we've only got listed Murata Niokore with concussion out of this one, Brian. Was he category 1 or category 2 symptoms?
So I think it was Category 2 because the way that it was reported on was that he had failed his HIA in the sheds. So by the sounds of things, and look, I didn't see, he didn't see him get knocked out on the field or anything like that. So it sounds like it was Category 2. Whether, that means that he is going to try and play next week, I think, that's very unlikely with what we've seen so far this season. So more than likely you're going to be looking at Nia Corey out again and missing next week, unfortunately.
Yeah, so he'll be missing for next week for sure. Big game up on the sunny coast just recently, Brian. That was the Rabbitohs v the Broncos there. Good to see my boys get a win again and just keep racking them up. Big news out of this one was Latrell Mitchell with the calf that we've mentioned on and off. It seems like for quite a few weeks now, hasn't it? All the way back from Origin. Was it Origin 1 initially where he was injured as well? Far out. It doesn't feel like that long ago. It was actually a red hot time ago. So we were going to talk about him again there, Brian. I guess with Latrell, what are you sort of expecting in terms of his return to play? And I might fire a few other questions at you as you get into the nitty-gritty of this one, because it's a big talking point. He's very interesting from a fantasy football perspective as well, isn't he?
Yeah, so this was fantastic timing because I wrote up a big thing on Patreon how I was bringing him in. It was, for Supercoach. He was coming in for me. I was taking the plunge. I was happy to do it. And then literally within half an hour, he was ruled out.
Perfect.
So that was just, wonderful. Made me look really, really good to all the wonderful patrons that I have on there. But, I guess the biggest thing, and whether I'm a half glass full kind of guy, because I was already looking to bring him in, but I'll just read a couple of the quotes from Demetrio. Latrell won't play. He hasn't trained with the team a lot, and he only had one full session with the team on Tuesday. There's no pressure from us to play him this weekend. We want him right. The performance staff would rather him get through another week of training. He's itching to play. He'll get another Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday session in if we err on the side of caution, and that's what we'll do. He'll definitely be back next week. So, look, obviously, coach speak is a very, very dangerous game because, it can go either way where they try and undersell or oversell injury situations, all that kind of stuff. I think the biggest thing here is that there would make sense with them coming off the bye because obviously on the bye, a lot of teams will let their players go away and have a bit of time off, which is more than likely what happened with Souths. So it would make sense that, Latrell has only had that one sort of full training session and then a captain's run with the team. With how long he's been out for, I mean, in my post sort of indicated it was 10 weeks now. It is not surprising at all if Souths want to give him that extra week. And to be honest with you, it actually makes me a little bit, if that is true, it makes me even more confident in his ability sort of moving forward, because I always talk about the issue with a lot of these injuries with guys coming back is they are coming back at the very first moment that they need to, because at the end of the day, when we go down to social support, the saying would be we're not playing for sheep stations, but these guys are playing for sheep stations, right? This is the creme de la creme, top of the shelf. These guys need to come back the very second that they can. So seeing someone a situation like this, an extra week be taken, it actually gives me a lot of confidence for his re-injury risk sort of, being lower than it usually would be if they were kind of, rushing him back in as quickly as possible. So, as I said, very, very likely that I'm taking the glass half full because, once again, if he's named this week, I'm bringing him in next week as well. So there's a real danger that there is a tinge of bias there, and I'm happy to admit that. But I think objectively, when I look at it, and I guess flip it the other way, the one thing that does concern me is the fact that he's been out for 10 weeks. The fact that he's been out for 10 weeks suggests to me that there could be some deficiencies there, and that's why sort of, it kept aggravating. Has he got on top of all of those deficiencies? That is concerning. I think the difference here with Latrell is that Souths absolutely need him firing and going off to make the final. So there's that big motivation there. And at the end of the day, the upside is sky high. If we were talking here about who am I going to be really mean to here? I'll say it because I really like Christian Welsh, but say it was Christian Welsh coming back off a 10-week calf injury. I'm not rushing to bring him into my team, right? Because like the upside to a Christian Welsh probably isn't there from a super coach perspective, but someone like Latrell, the risk is far outweighed by the potential reward. And someone like another situation we can talk about where we've done similar on this show is Kalen Ponga earlier in the year. Like, you know, he was coming back not long off having 5 or 6 weeks off for from his latest concussion. Now, we both looked at him and went, he's back at fullback. That's where he needs to be. We're happy to take that risk because the upside is sky high, and that's obviously worked out really well. And don't get me wrong, we've gotten a lot wrong, as everybody does, but that's a perfect example of where that injury risk, I'm happy to take it on. James, I assume being a Latrell Mitchell fan yourself, like you'd be on a similar wavelength.
Yeah, I had him traded in this week until I saw your post and had a last minute scramble. So I'll talk about that in a bit more depth later, but I went from Latrell in my team to Reece Walsh. That worked out pretty well for me there on multiple fronts. I guess going back to Latrell and thinking earlier in the piece there, Brian, with the amount of time he spent on the sideline, do you think the initial report of a low-grade calf injury is on the money here, or do you think it may have been a bit more severe than the club or New South Wales was letting on? I'm just trying to, I guess, what are your thoughts on why this has taken 10 weeks for Latrell to get back on the field? Do you think it was initially higher grade injury, or do you think it was complication during the rehab process? It's been radio silent from the South's side of things, so I guess we're purely speculating here. Do you have any sort of lean either way on why it would have been something that was initially, maybe not a serious injury to ruling him out for, the better part of half a year?
Yeah, I can actually give you a bit more than speculation because I did. It was almost when I was looking into with him being ruled out, I found an interview, I think it was with Demetrio, where he kind of dove into it a little bit and he said effectively what has happened here. And this is the most common reason I find that calves tend to extend out and have that notoriety of extending the recovery time, is he said it just scanned initially better than it actually was. So what they found is that the initial scan, and like as somebody who knows the anatomy, you know that the calf isn't one muscle, right? You've got your gastroc, your soleus, or plenty of other muscles in around the calf. We talk about plantaris, which has been a fun one with Tavita Pangai last year. There's plenty of structures in around the calf that can have damage that maybe, might have been overlooked, can be overlooked at certain times. I find the involvement of the soleus, which is the muscle underneath the gastroc, which are those, really, really clear calf muscles that you see. There can be some involvement there that can often be missed. So I would say that is what's happened, is that, and that's what Demetrio kind of intimated, was that the initial scan sort of didn't really tell the full story, and they must have done further investigation since then to sort of see, there's actually a bit more going on here than we initially thought. But look, at the end of the day, calf muscles are really, really niggly, and the way I always describe it is you can get to 90%. I mean, Latrell was named for Origin too, and this is just about as textbook as it gets for calves, is that he got named for Origin too, which tells me that he was doing relatively well. He was probably progressing through his rehab. And I see it all the time, even with my patients. You get people to 90, 85, 90%. They're doing really well. They're doing all kinds of running, box hops, lateral bounds, all that kind of stuff. And you're like, right, we're going to work on explosiveness. We're going to work on power. We're going to work on acceleration. And it just doesn't come. It doesn't come. You're like, we're only a week away from returning. And all of a sudden that week becomes 3 weeks, becomes 4 weeks, because it's just getting over that really, really powerful, explosive movement that you need from your calf, especially as an athlete in a game like rugby league. And it sounds like that's exactly what was happening to Latrell.
Yeah, nicely put, Brian. I think that's a really good comprehensive summary there. We'll move on to the Titans v the Roosters here. Only injury concern here, Victor Radley hamstring tightness out of this one, Brian. Was he another rule out pre-game as well, wasn't he?
Yeah. So he got done pre-game. Look, I mean, tightness. Once again, this is the Roosters. The fact that we got anything from the Roosters was astounding to me, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, look, tightness usually wouldn't seem out for too long, so you'd think he'd be back next week. And I mean, if the Roosters are going to go on the run, they played really well this weekend. If they're going to go on the run, they probably need him back this weekend.
Yeah, good point there. Knights v the Storm here. Brian, it's quite incredible to me that Kalen Ponga moves to 1 and the Knights are somehow a much, much better team. It's almost like we said earlier in the year that if you play Kalen Ponga at fullback, he's very good at football and your team will go well. So good to see the Knights get a W there with Kalen playing some really good footy off the back of it. The Storm had an injury concern from this one with Remus Smith with a groin injury by the look of things from the video.
Yeah, mate, that was nasty. And I mean, everyone will automatically go back to Regan Campbell-Gillard from earlier in the season, the hip drop from Payne Haas that resulted in RCG tearing his groin or his adductor off the bone. So that was an 8 to 10 week recovery for RCG, and this looked scarily similar. Like he had the weight of 2 tacklers coming directly down on his back in a pretty, explosive motion, and it just wishboned, spread his legs apart in simple terms, which, and he struggled to walk off, all that kind of stuff. So, it just did not look good. Like, I would say he'll at least be looking at a partial tear, grade 2, which would be, anywhere from that 4 to kind of 6 to 8 week range. But if he's completely torn, it'll be kind of 8+ weeks, which would be, quite significant with the Storm. Once again, they're dancing around that top 4 as well and need all the troops they can get. I will say on Kayla, mate, I still sit here and I just cannot believe, even if you take out, and we spoke enough about the injury reasons as to why we thought it was a good enough reason for him to not play out of a position that he is accustomed to, that his instincts are, all that kind of thing. But just from a performance perspective, seriously, surely he cannot be moved for the rest of his career now. Like, you just look at him, unless he gets old and slow or something like that, when he's 31, 32 or something. But surely it's been tried twice now. It just hasn't happened. And he's so good at fullback. So good.
Yeah, he's so good at fullback. He makes up for whoever's playing 6. So I think if it ain't broke, then don't muck around with it too much more. Cowboys versus the Eels, we'll move on to next, Brian. So 3 injury concerns out of this one. Jeremiah Nanai with an AC joint injury by the looks of things. Sean Lane with a fairly graphic elbow dislocation there. That was good footage that you put up there of his elbow dislocation, but pretty bad news for Sean Lane. And then last one was Griffin Neame with a concussion out of this game. Do you want to start us off with Jeremiah Nanai, maybe, Brian, to kick things off in this game?
Yeah, mate, I put up footage. They kind of were strapping him pretty heavily with some ice in the sheds, and then post-game he was in a sling, which is always concerning for at least a grade 2, potentially a grade 3 AC joint injury. The interesting thing about grade 2s and grade 3s with the AC, so a grade 2 being a partial tearing of the ligaments in the AC joint, and then a grade 3 being a complete tear. The one thing I will say is that very, very rarely do AC joint injuries need surgery. So even if it's a grade 3, a complete tear, I think in the 5 years that I've tracked AC joint injuries, I've seen 2 need surgery, and there would be 20 to 30 a year AC joint injury. So it's not common at all. But the interesting thing here is that grade 3s actually can come back quicker than grade 2s, because an AC joint injury by design, especially at this level, is more a pain management thing than anything. Once you can get rid of that pain and sort of get it moving a little bit better, they needle you up, put some padding on it, and they just get you back out there, because the risk of sort of long-term permanent damage is quite low. You can't really, especially with a grade 3, once you've torn all those ligaments, as long as you've got it strapped up well, you've got minimal pain in there, there's no more ligaments to tear. They're torn. They're gone. So there's nothing else you can really damage there. Instability in that joint isn't a massive deal in terms of, different if you tear your MCL, you can put your ACL at risk in your knee. With an AC joint, you're not, by having some instability at the AC joint, it's not really, from what I can think of, really causing too much issue at other places where it's like, oh, you're an increased risk of, shoulder dislocation or something like that. It doesn't really have that effect. Whereas with your grade 2s, the main thing here is pain. Like, it's not about risking further damage. They don't really care. They probably wouldn't mind if you went out and went from a grade 2 to a grade 3 and tore it more, because your pain would settle down quicker. Because if you've got a partially torn ligament and you go out there and you play on it, every time you cop a blow to that area, it kind of aggravates that partial tear a little bit more. So you're in more pain again and again. So those grade 2s, look, the usual range for both grade 2s and grade 3s is anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks. So it is quite a wide range, but it just shows you, I guess, and that's like, I've seen many grade 3s complete tears come back 2 weeks post-injury. So miss a week, come back the second week. But I've also seen, grade 2s come back then. I've seen grade 2s come back 6 weeks post-injury. So there is a fair range there, and I think for the cows, that's, a bit of a concern is how uncertain that could be. But I don't think it's going to be he'll be back next week, purely because he was in that sling, and that's a bit of a concern. Sean Lane with the elbow dislocation, once again, we toss our minds back. Bradman Best had a really, really graphic one, I think it was last year or the year before. Yep. That was, like almost probably more brutal than this one, if you can even get to that point. But like it looks horrible, and there are absolutely like neurovascular concerns, I think, is probably the biggest thing. So nerves and blood vessels, that's probably the biggest thing. Similar when you dislocate a knee, you can disrupt either the nerve or the blood supply to to the lower hand and stuff like the lower arm and the hand. That can be an emergent situation. That can be really, really nasty. So they have to try and, reduce or relocate that joint as quickly as possible, and then kind of assess, do we still have blood flow? Are the nerves all still connected? Is everything going on well there? Because if not, like, that's big trouble. Thankfully, it sounds like everything was all good, because in the post-match, Brad Arthur said, yep, he's in the sheds. They've got it back in. He seems okay, but he's going to miss a while. Look, I think the biggest thing here is that you see, and I'm sure a lot of people watching see something as graphic as that and think that guy is gone for ages. Like, he'll be out for a long, long time. But yeah, elbow dislocations, they're pretty quick. Guys can come back in 4 to 6 weeks if provided that there's no fracture there. So I know 4 to 6 weeks isn't like necessarily a quick recovery, but I think in comparison to how graphic that looks, like many injuries where there is that much, bone sticking out in all the wrong places, guys are going to take months and months and months to get back from a lot of things that look like that. So 4 to 6 weeks, I think, when all's said and done and being relative, it's actually not too bad.
Yeah, I think probably the other thing for the physio nerds there with your elbow dislocations, you commonly see it posterolaterally. So if they're going to go, that's where they most commonly go. My understanding with elbow dislocations as well, Ryan, you might be able to fill me in on this as well, but my understanding is usually if you have a dislocation, about 50% of the time there's an associated fracture there as well. So that's why a lot of times, instead of just plain filming elbow dislocations, they'll CT them as well, because there's commonly fracture associated with it. And sometimes those sort of radial head or even like coronoid sort of type fractures are hard to detect on plain films as well. So if you are in a clinical setting, it's probably useful just to keep your eyes and ears on that sort of stuff as well. Any other pearls of wisdom for elbow dislocations, Brian, that you've seen clinically?
No, like, I think the biggest thing, like, we throw back to the Bradman Best, I was like shocked that there was no fracture with Brad. Like, I could not believe it. Like, how you can have such a graphic dislocation and not even have like a little bony fragment come off somewhere, because I think he was back. He would have been back in about five weeks or something like that. And I was just like, yeah, the fact that you have something like that probably shocked me. More than I let on at the time, because I wasn't shocked that he was back in 5 weeks from an elbow dislocation, but just the fact that he somehow avoided a fracture, especially with the stats like you're talking about, like 50%. Yeah. And I'm like, if there's ever going to be an elbow dislocation that's going to be part of the 50%, it was going to be Bradman Best. Like, it was just insane. So it made me kind of reassess. Like, I would usually almost say, oh yeah, there's definitely a fracture there with Sean Lane, but it made me change my
Worst
thinking
case.
and go, I'm not going to, sort of jump the gun because it's potential that it is quite clean.
Good chat. Penrith versus Bulldogs was next, Brian. So Spencer Laniu, MCL injury. Isaac Tungo was ruled out pre-game with a leg injury. I don't know much more on that. Sorry to put you in the dark there, Brian. And then last one was Jacob Preston, who was ruled out pre-game with what's been reported as flu symptoms, I believe.
Yeah, well, called flu symptoms. There was also somebody else reporting, I think it was Brent Reed, said that potentially he had a neck sprain from the week in wrestle at training. So bit of ducks and drakes there. I know Reed Marnie did have the flu as well, and by all accounts, they kind of said he shouldn't even be playing. That's why he started off the bench. So there might be a bit of flu going around. But, I guess that one's a bit of a watch and wait. Spencer Leniu with the MCL, the interesting thing here is that he suffered it about... I checked the video literally just before he came on because I didn't have time to sort of go through 12 minutes of footage because I heard that he came off at halftime, so he obviously played through it. He played through it for about 12 or 13 minutes leading into halftime because he kind of... I haven't recorded the video yet to put it up on socials, but he got caught up awkwardly in a tackle, but got up relatively fine, but then disappeared from the telecast. Like, I was flicking through, disappeared from the telecast for a good, set and a half, and then he came back into frame with his leg strapped up, really heavy. So he's obviously sort of flagged the trainer down, gone back, got it strapped up, and he played out, the majority of the rest of that half, but then has gone off. The thing I'll say about MCLs is we have seen guys time and time again. It's a bit like syndesmosis injuries. We've seen guys play through, whether it be 10 minutes or the rest of the game, and then come back and it not just be a minor issue. For whatever reason, there are some guys who have grade 2s, grade 3s, who just kind of go, yeah, it's not that big a deal, to the trainer, just give me some strapping, and they get some strapping. So whether he's come off at halftime, they've checked it and gone, mate, this is way too loose, you cannot go back on. I guess the general guide here, grade 1, 1 to 3 weeks, grade 2, 3 to 6 weeks, grade 3, 6 to 8 weeks, kind of the range. So, yeah, look, obviously wide range there. There's not much you can tell. The video wasn't great because he didn't go down like a sack of spuds, so they didn't do a close-up of the, a slow-mo or anything like that. So it's really hard to tell sort of how much that knee actually moved inwards. But yeah, I don't think it's not going to be an ACL or anything like that. And then Isaac Tungo with the leg issue, it's supposed to be minor. He's supposed to be back next week is what I've been told.
Yeah, that's pretty key for fantasy players. I was keen to look at bringing him in, but yeah, I'm glad that in the lead up to this game, he was sort of ruled out. Someone's got an eye on for the weeks upcoming. Sharks versus Seagulls here. Bit of a boil over for the Manly boys to get the win here. The Sharks are really just, I don't know what's doing there, Brian. They've fallen well off the bandwagon there. Injury concerns from this one was Taniela Paseka. So he's an MCL injury. This was a fairly, looked to me like a high-grade MCL injury. It was an awful sort of mechanism, wasn't it, with his foot stuck in the ground and sort of that twisting mechanism in a tackle. Josh Alloway has a shoulder dislocation, and Teague Wilton, I think you mentioned pre the game that he's been confirmed of having meniscus repair surgery. So that effectively rules out his season this year, doesn't it?
Yeah, so that was a bit of a surprise. We didn't even mention that. We were kind of speculating because it hadn't even been announced what he'd suffered, but we thought meniscus was probably the most likely outcome there. That's what's come out. But yeah, I think just worth quickly chatting, and probably for those who, those Sharks fans who are probably filthy that Wilton has been ruled out, for the rest of the season. The one thing I will say about meniscus repair, so usually your meniscus being your shock absorber in your knee, that almost like a chocker sponge in there that, provides you some shock absorption between the two bones. Usually if there's a tear in there, what they'll do is they'll go in with keyhole surgery and just remove the portion of the meniscus that is damaged and try and smooth it all out and then leave you, and you'll be back in 4 to 6 weeks. And that's what we see with a lot of guys who have meniscus injuries. The problem here is, once again, if you imagine there's a sponge in between your two knee bones, if you take away some of that sponge, you all of a sudden don't have as much shock absorption in that knee. So in the long run, there are risks for, recurrent knee issues, early onset osteoarthritis, all those kind of things. And we've seen that all the time. Guys like Boyd Cordner, these kind of things have said, yeah, I've got bone on my knee, those kind of things. Whereas here with Wilton, what they've done is they've gone in and repaired the meniscus by all accounts. So they go in, they stitch up the tear. The reason they can't do that all the time is that not all of the meniscus heals really well. Some of it doesn't have much of a blood supply, if at all. So obviously this was an area where it could be repaired. It had some blood supply there. The problem there is you've got to give it time to repair. You've got to give it time to heal, and you're usually looking about 3 to 4 months. But the positive thing there is that it does give him better long-term outcomes. The evidence for that is certainly better long-term. You still have all your sponge in your knee. You have all of that shock absorption, which is good. There is a slightly increased risk of re-tear because you now have stitches or, whatever they use to repair that meniscus. You do have those, in your knee. So, and that area of the meniscus will be a little bit weaker. But overall, if you have to have meniscus surgery, this is the one you want to have. Certainly for long run, mid to long run anyway. Taniel Paseka with the MCL, definitely really, really nasty. The medical staff are saying they suspect grade 3, and the hands-on tests are pretty accurate with that. So he'd be looking at, 6 to 8 weeks at the very least. They rarely require surgery, but it can happen, and that pushes it out sort of beyond that 10-week mark. And Josh Aloiai with the shoulder dislocation, I mean, this is deja vu with Jaden Sewer, mate. We spoke about Jaden Sewer, had the instability episode earlier in the season, the shoulder subluxation, has been playing through recurrent sort of shoulder issues and then has succumbed to surgery. Now, hopefully that, is not the case with Aloiai, but apparently he had multiple instability episodes in the game today, and I think it was like the 3rd time it came out they pulled him off the field. So it's obviously fairly weak. I mean, best case you'd be looking at, 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks maybe, to rehab it and strengthen it up. So, at the very least, I wouldn't be surprised if his season, is over in terms of if he wants to rehab it. But it sounds like if it's coming out 3 times in a game, that reconstruction surgery is needed there.
Probably a good one for the fantasy enthusiasts to keep an eye on with the state of the Manly middle rotation there. I think you look at it. Paseka, who plays reasonably big minutes there, and Aloiai does as well, Brian. So I guess, Jakey takes up a lot of the minutes, but if you're a fantasy enthusiast, probably keep an eye on that situation when teamers come out. There might be a few names that sort of lead you to go that way if you do need numbers in the front row forward spot. To round things off for the round 21 injuries, Brian, we're going to talk NRLW now. So few names of interest here. So I'll just list them off to you and then you can go into a little bit more detail. So we'll start with Talia Fuimaono. She had an ankle injury which looked like almost like an eversion high ankle type mechanism from a non-contact type injury. It was quite an interesting one when you put the video up about that. Amber Hall was ruled out with a foot injury. Julia Robinson, my favourite Broncos player, who was ruled out with a hamstring injury. Emily Bass with a neck or shoulder concern in that lifting tackle against the Cowboys there as well. Last 2 was Taylor Predabon with a finger injury. This was a fairly sort of nasty graphic finger injury as well. And lucky last, LaShawn Albert-Jones with a concussion there, Brian. Where do you want to start with the NRLW injuries? I'll let you take the floor.
Yeah, let's go top to bottom. So Talia Fuimaono, I think once again we try and cater to fantasy enthusiasts, Supercoach, footy fans in general. But as a physio nerd, and I'm sure you were the same, this one was super interesting to me. I never like seeing any player get injured, but this is what we work in, right? We work in these kind of things, and sort of seeing how injuries happen is part of our job. This happened really strange, because I know I only caught up with it once again. Mum's Magic Round meant that I was really, running around after the kids when this game was on, and kind of got a few messages through. Oh, she's definitely blown her Achilles. I went back and watched, and all the commentary was, yep, she's blown her Achilles. It didn't really fit an Achilles, just because something's non-contact and down around the foot doesn't mean it's Achilles, right? You need to have that kind of real sudden push off, and she was mid-run when it happened, and very, very rare for an Achilles to go sort of in the middle of a run, not from that kind of push-off mechanism like right at the start of a run or landing or something like that. She had that little bit of direction change in it as well. I actually sort of, when I first thought of it, I was thinking, potentially like midfoot, Liz Frank, or even like fifth metatarsal. So kind of like a metatarsal is a bone in your foot. You have a few bones in your foot that have poor blood supply relatively, so you can have like a stress reaction build up, and then it's that straw that broke the camel's back, the last one to go. And I think someone like Reed Marnie had a fifth metatarsal fracture from a similar kind of mechanism in recent times, back in the COVID year, I think. So like that was kind of my first thought, but they're going with ankle is what they've said for sure. So when you look at it, as you said, it looks like a syndesmosis injury, like eversion, so potentially medial ankle, but then she had the ice that she was putting on her ankle on the like right over the syndesmosis, right over that upper ankle kind of area. So it did fit that. Her foot turned up and out, which is, high ankle sprain. It's just extremely rare for that to happen non-contact. Like I can't think of many that have happened like that. Like a few, when we say non-contact, where they've kind of got stuck in the turf and in a tackle, they've got sort of pushed back over their foot and it's really violently turned. But for it to happen sort of non-contact in a run, like while she's running, I can't think of one off the top of my head where I've seen that. So, I mean, like I'd love to be wrong and it just be something minor, like a minor medial ankle sprain or something like that. Look, I'm actually really, really interested from a physio perspective to see what comes back with this one, because it'll be, I think, if anything, quite a unique sort of mechanism for whatever it is. Amber Hall with her foot injury, there was nothing I could see on the video obvious as to what happened there, so she'll have to go for scans. Julie Robinson with the hamstring. Unfortunately, mate, I'd say, as we know with hamstrings, she'll be missing at least a week because, we just know with hamstrings it's really hard to get up and down, even with a minor strain, sort of by the next week. She just seemed to be almost cramping and she walked off pretty well, so you'd think it was minor, and usually you'd get athletes back in that 2 to 3 week range for something like that. So hopefully, fingers crossed for the Bronx and for her, that's what it is. Emily Bass at the neck and shoulder, she got the spear tackle or the lifting tackle right onto that neck. She landed on her left shoulder but was holding her right arm as she came off, and that's that typical like stinger burner where the neck sort of bends and pinches the nerve in the neck as it comes out of the neck down into the right arm. So the fact that I sort of looked at it, the first I saw the lifting tackle, I thought, she's done her left AC joint or potentially her left collarbone. But when I saw she was holding her right arm coming off, I'm like, that's probably, she's pinched the nerve as it runs down into there, and that's potentially the cause of that. So provided that she hasn't bulged a disc or anything like that, which is highly unlikely, the recovery for that should be pretty quick. Usually we see that settle down relatively quickly, and you see them come back in 1 to 2 weeks. So hopefully that's the case for Bass. Predabon with the finger, graphic, but she was able to return and she'll just strap that up and keep playing. And then Albert Jones, she'll miss 11 days with the Category 1 concussion.
Yeah, very good, Brian. That's the wrap of the week. Yeah, that's the wrap of the round 21 week injuries. So I'll let you go into the Patreon questions now. So as you mentioned before, patreon.com/NRL physio. If you want these questions answered on the Magic Sponge each week, if you want to get Brian a little bit more detail on things that you have concerns about or thoughts about or opinions about, then he's more than happy to answer them through the Patreon app. So for the first question we've got is, are there any players that you're concerned about heading into the end of the year? This patron's got Tohu Harris, and they're a little bit concerned about them resting him or limiting the minutes in the run up to the finals. Are there any players you've got listed off there, Brian, that you might be somewhat worried about?
I think the biggest thing here, and I answered this briefly during the week, is that it comes down to the team for me and where they are mathematically on the the ladder. So I know everybody knows this, right? And everybody looks out for it, and people are already talking about Penrith potentially resting people because of, where they are on the ladder and stuff like that. So I think overall, like someone like Tohu definitely fits into that mold. I mean, he was supposedly sick last week, but then this week he just didn't look great. So I don't know whether that sickness, he's obviously dealing with this ongoing knee issue, whether that's the thing that's flared up. He's definitely someone who would usually worry me in terms of outside of a physical perspective. It's like, okay, where are they on the ladder, all that kind of stuff. But I just don't know. The Warriors have got a pretty soft run leading into the finals, but I still think they're going to be in and around that top 4 battle. And if they are, they're going to need Tohu out there. So he's probably the one who worries me the most. So it was probably quite a good question from a Tohu owner. Another few that came to mind, and once again, thinking along the lines of teams that are locked in, Adam Reynolds, I think, is someone who, if the Broncos get locked in, he's someone who could do with the rest. Like, he's always dealing with those niggles. SJ even is a sneaky one. He was dealing with a foot or ankle injury for about a month a few weeks ago, where he was in a moon boot during the week. So once again, if Tohu's getting rested, potentially SJ has a week or two off here or there to prime him up for the finals. So that's why another thing that played into me sort of selling SJ to Cleary was, I was like, as much as Cleary was coming back off an injury, I'm like, SJ's been dealing with this injury. If the Warriors do get locked in, I can see him getting a bit of a rest. Cam Murray is probably the other one we had listed here. Like, if South get locked in somewhere, he's another guy who could potentially see some reduced games. But at the end of the day, I think South are going to be they're going to be under the pump now, especially after losing on the weekend. So, yeah, I don't think there's any injury-wise that jump out to me. I mean, what about you, mate? I'm sure you're in a pretty similar boat, more based on the team than the actual injury situation.
You're right on that point, Brian. And I think Penrith have shown a propensity to rest people in the past as well. So I think you can sort of stick to the program there and assume that they will. Payne Haas coming back this week, I suppose. He just had a couple of weeks off. His minutes weren't as big as they usually were, despite the Broncos being down on a few troops for the middle. So that might be one just to keep an eye on, whether they increase his minutes before their bye or whether they don't. I think given the Broncos have a bye, they may not necessarily need to rest too many other people that I can think of, apart from, maybe Adam Reynolds or maybe Payne Haas, just for a freshen up. And I think the only other one we may have listed in was like a Nelson Asofa Solomona. He was sort of dealing with like the rib sternum thing at the start of the year. So whether he needs that managed or monitored. Perhaps Campbell Graham as well, although he looked pretty good the other night. He's still wearing a chest plate on his sternum for the contact side of things, so maybe he's not completely back, but he's probably as close as he's going to be. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've expertly nailed off all the names that need to be talked about there.
Yep, all good. Second question is about Jeremiah Nanai. So it looks like he's injured his shoulder, as we mentioned before, with the AC injury. How far off is Hylam Lukey from returning? Would he be someone that you'd look at picking up for draft format?
Yeah, I think next week or the week after. That's always sort of where I had him pegged. So he had that facial fracture. Look, I think he's a solid pickup for draft or for Classic, really, if he gets that starting spot. Because, as we said with Nanai, it's not just, that 2 to 6 weeks is the usual range for those moderate to high-grade ACs. But then even when he comes back, it could, he can have that in-game aggravation. AC joints are known for that. So, yeah, I think he's solid, but the complicating factor there is the guy came off the bench on the weekend. His name eludes me at this point in time, but he looks so good as well. So I think the Cows are really, really well stocked in that position. So I would say Lukey's a good speculator at this point in time. I wouldn't be, going crazy for it, like trading for him or anything like that. But he's well worth a waiver claim, just in case Nanai has to miss 4 to 6 weeks because of his shoulder, and then potentially the Cows, they might lock in a final spot and go, okay, we just want Nanai for the finals, so let's sit him out for 6 weeks and get him right. So yeah, look, I think it is a good play. I mean, how do you feel about Lukey? You reckon for either Classic or draft?
Definitely draft. Try scoring upside for me. As soon as I see his name, he's done it in the past. He doesn't need to have 80 minutes there on that edge to score you pretty good points consistently. He's done that in the past. He's, very young player. He's now, what would he be now? He'd be sort of, how far off his ACL would it be, Brian? When did he do his ACL last year? Because he's sort of further down the track from that now as well, isn't he? So even
Yeah.
that would make me more confident in him too, that he's probably going reasonably well from that perspective.
Yeah, definitely. He'd be well over 12, 14,
That's what I thought he'd be,
maybe
yeah.
14, 15 months post ACL injury.
Prime.
So this is when you like to start to see him for sure.
Yeah, so I think that'd be sort of my reasons for going that way. I just don't think Nano will miss that long, but I think if you can afford the hold or you can sort of roster him and stash him, he's probably not such a bad shout there. Lucy Leilua looks like the one to have if you don't have him in your team. He's going great guns there on the edge at the moment for the Cowboys. Last question from Patreon here, Brian. So not to be the fun police, but are you concerned that the backflips that the players are doing in their try celebrations, are they dangerous?
That's
Do
a
you
good
hate
question.
having fun, Brian? Do you hate having fun?
Yeah, I am a fun sucker. I'm sure there are a lot of my patients who, if you ask them, I had two in particular on Friday who I sucked the fun right out of their lives by telling them they could not play this weekend just gone. So I was Mr. Evil on Friday afternoon. I came home feeling a bit shit about myself because, they were both really, really keen but just couldn't quite tick those boxes. Look, I guess the biggest thing here is it's not, if we go by the letter of the law, it's not the worst question because at the end of the day, and I think us being big fans of the NFL, we've seen quite a few guys try and do the Aaron Rodgers, is it discount double check?
Yeah, discount double check, yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, with the belt.
And we've seen them, and all that is for those who don't follow NFL is literally jumping in the air, like a small jump, nothing too big, coming down and sort of putting a belt on yourself as you land, right? And I know of two guys specifically who have done their ACLs just doing that celebration, right? So, and that's very, very simple. A very simple movement. The one thing that I will say in favor of the guys doing backflips to try celebrations and the two guys who did their ACLs doing that silly celebration in the NFL were guys who probably don't do a lot of jumping and landing because I think they were linemen, and linemen are people who are ground and pound. They're not doing a lot of jumping and landing. They're not used to that kind of movement, even though they're footballers at the end of the day. Those kind of guys stay on the ground. So as soon as you start leaving the ground, it's something that's foreign to them. These guys who can do backflips, they can do backflips. So if you can actually there's no guys who are trying to do this and screwing up the backflip. I can't think of one anyway who's not making it the whole way around. So the guys who are doing it, they're able to do it because they're supreme athletes. They are used to doing these backflips, so they're pretty good at it. They're not guys. It's not like these linemen who aren't used to jumping up and landing down on their. They're not used to that because it's not something they do. Whereas these guys, they obviously have done it before. It's in their wheelhouse. It's in their muscle memory. So it kind of goes both ways. Yes, there is some danger, but at the end of the day, the guys who do a backflip, they are able to do a backflip because they're supreme athletes. So I'm not as worried about supreme athletes as I am for people who aren't used to that kind of thing. Would you agree?
Yeah, I can remember distinctly the Detroit player you're alluding to, Stephen Tulloch. He actually tore his ACL doing a sack celebration, and then he never got a contract again. That was it for him. It literally ruined his career just with I do love the NFL hype of making a single play and just the G up that goes with it. But in his situation, it didn't work out very well for him in the short, medium, or long term, unfortunately. There, if you do get on YouTube, search for Stephen Tulloch, Tulloch. It's one of the more bizarre things you'll ever see, but very memorable.
And the other one for any football fans listening is the Cristiano Ronaldo Sue.
Of course,
he does.
Yeah.
The one thing with that is he does flip 180 degrees and go backwards, so less likely to tear an ACL that way. But still something to consider. Okay, so look, as a new segment this week, we've obviously got Bundy Mixer back on board, and it has started week 1 this week. So we have our Bundy Mixer picks So, James, give me your team for week 1, how you went, and then let's talk through our picks for week 2, because I think, it's a challenge trying to pick those NRLW players. There's not a whole lot of stats. You can't go on to, podcasts or find websites that are dedicated to these kind of things like you can with Supercoach and Fantasy NRL. So it's a challenge. So the best the people have got are our expert voices. So let's give them some really good picks.
All right, we're going to bounce back and forward with this one, Brian, because we're going to do a little bit of research as we go here. So in my team this week, had Harry Grant at hooker, Taufa in the front row position. I had Olivia Koenig at second row forward from the Roosters there. Nico Hines was the half. Isabel Kelly was my centre, and Dylan Edwards was fullback. So I boosted Nico Hines and Kelly, and I got 399. So probably not the best, not the worst in terms of selections there. Harry Grant was probably a little bit of a letdown, but there weren't too many players that went absolutely troppo this week, so I don't feel too bad about missing out there. I will say someone who's really on my radar now after watching the Titans-Cowboys game was Shania Power from the Cowboys in second row. So not only did she base extremely well in points scored, she also has rum and coke on her wrist tape in her profile picture, which to me just screams must have in my mixer team forever moving forward. So to Shania, massive shout out for that, because that is exceptionally good areas for mine.
Bundy, get on it. There's a sponsorship opportunity there for
definitely
sure.
opportunity there for Bundaberg Rum enthusiasts listening along. And I think if you are an enthusiast, get Shania Power in your team, get her ownership levels up there for the mixer point of view. I guess in terms of the people that we're thinking about for next week, Brian, I might let you go through your team first, and we might bounce a few ideas about who we potentially want to have in our team for the week upcoming.
Yeah, I was pretty similar. I had Harry Grant. That's a bit of a letdown. I think the Storm weren't as good against the Knights as we all thought. Simona Taufa I had as well. I went with Amber Hall. So I did a bit of research. I saw she averaged about 53 on an edge last year, which is pretty solid in the mixer. Like, if you can score 50, I want you in my team. Like, 50 is kind of the base that I want, and then you want that upside of up to kind of a 70 kind of player if they, score a try or something like that. So Hall at that 52, she obviously got injured, so that's really killed me. I also had Cleary. I boosted him. I had Isaac Tungo. Obviously had to change that late to Stephen Crichton, idiot, rather than Peachy. That cost me a lot of points. And then I had Tamika Upton, who I also boosted as well. I thought that the Knights would win pretty handily against the Dragons there, which they did. How they won 32-16 and Tamika Upton only scored 30, mid-30s, I will never know. So that's a bit of a killer to me, because I know Tamika put up many scores sort of up above 50, 60 last season. So that was a bit of a killer. Amber Hall was a killer, so I only scored 326. So that, is not a good start at all. So I'm going to have to really make up the points there. I think for next week, from an NRL perspective, for me, like, the South Stack makes a lot of sense. That's kind of where I'm...
It's got to,
Yeah, like you got to lock that in, I think, because they're playing the Tigers. Shania Power, I love that call. The
get it up there.
How good.
She's good.
So as an edge, get her in. The other one that I'll say, my overall, and if you're looking to construct your teams, and you'll talk a little bit more about it in terms of what positions you want to target in the NRLW versus the NRL. But for me, how my team starts every week is in the mid position, so middle forward. And I am, without doubt, locking in either Simona Taufa or Millie Boyle, and then I'm going from there. That is how my team starts each and every week, because those two, Millie Boyle scored 75 this week. She scored a try, so obviously gets her that little bit more than Taufa, who scored 57 from Taufa. She plays 70 minutes in the middle. Like, those two guys, for me, I know it's boring. It's not a point of difference, but I just think you get your point of differences elsewhere. I think you lock lock in Tautha or Boyle, depending on who you want more in that particular week. I think Boyle, there's absolutely an argument there to be had because she probably has more try-scoring upside. But, yeah, that's where I start. Mate, hit me with your overall, because I think that's a good thing for listeners who are looking for, roster construction and that kind of thing. What positions are you targeting in the NRLW to try and sort of maximise that point scoring?
Yeah, so I think for the NRL players specifically, I think you want to hit on hooker because you want to find an 80-minute hooker for the NRL boys because I think that gives you more chance of getting a much higher score. And I think you got to do the same for half because kicking meters are really important in this fantasy football format as well. So I think you got to go hooker for the blokes, half for the blokes. And then I think for centre wing or fullback, I'd probably lean towards probably the men in the fullback position, but the females tend to do pretty well at fullback too. I guess like historically, Tamika Upton, as you mentioned in the past, there, M. Tonegato's had a week or two in the past that she's been pretty handy out. Sammy Bremner was unbelievable there last year at fullback.
She was my pick every week last year.
You weren't missing out if you had her in there, and even Vani Politi for the Titans had a barnstorming game against the Cowboys as well. I always find it weird calling them the Cowboys for the girls team. It doesn't really make sense to my simple brain when I sort of look at the team list there as well. So I think if you're looking at constructing your team, I think you're looking at the NRLW, you're looking at the middle forwards, you're looking at edge, and you're looking at centre. I think that's probably the way I'm going to look at my team each and every week, unless there's an absolutely prime matchup that you think, yep, I can cash that in and score really well there. I think I agree with you for your mid positions. I think Tautha and also Millie Boyle are probably the ones. I'd probably throw Georgia Hale in there. She scored pretty well last year. I would just have to check her minutes for the Titans there, but her work rate was very, very high in this game. She based pretty well. I think she was in sort of like the mid 50s. She was in Tautha range, and she was the Kiwi rep there, Georgia Hale, but she was very
60,
good for the
scored 60
so
this week. So
I think they're sort of interchangeable, those three names. I guess from an edge position, Shania Power got to be in there for things that you love. Putting rum and coke on your wristbands is top notch for me. I think until proven otherwise, she might be the one. I do really like Olivia Koenig though. Like I think I spoke about her last year on the mixer. She's size, she's speed, she's skill, she's young, she's ascending. She's the prototype edge back rower. She's in a really good Roosters team. I think she's got massive try scoring upside. So I'll probably pick her in most of my teams until proven otherwise. She scored 45 this week, which isn't too bad, but I'll just have to probably just roll with that for the weeks upcoming there for Olivia Koenig. And then I guess, like you said before, for the centre wing position, I think Isabel Kelly and Jess Surgis are probably the two, aren't they? The two Roosters centres, again, high scoring team. I think that's how you want to go about things when you're constructing the teams. I think the Roosters look like the team to beat in NRLW, Brian. Would you agree on paper? I think they look like they've got the best team. So you probably want to try and stack that way if at all possible. And I think from the fullback position, I think you want to just play the NRL players and trying to find a matchup there.
Yeah, I think I really wanted to get Amber Hall because I thought she averaged, 52 in in a the Bronx is still a very good side, but playing in the Roosters, she was the piece that I wanted in that Roosters side for this weekend. Unfortunately, it didn't pay off, but I think having a piece of that Roosters edge backline, something like that, either one of the centres or an edge player, I think that's a really, really good place to be. And fullback-wise, I completely agree. I think finding a high upside. Like I went with Upton this week because I just thought the Knights could do a number on the Dragons, which they were able to do. It just didn't fall Upton's way. But just trying to find that upside for that really, really big game. So look, Bunny Mixer, how good. It's back again. James, I will say I did a forensic search just then. I got on Chrome and I zoomed and it definitely says rum and coke on her armband, so that is fantastic. So shout out. I know Shania's no doubt a Magic Sponge listener, but shout out to her. How good. Yeah,
it's going to be the profile for the Magic Sponge this week, I think. And if it's not, I'm going to be really let down by you, Brian.
I love it, mate. I love it. And look, we'll quickly wrap up our Supercoach moves because we do Supercoach Corner every week. James, how did you go? And quickly, what are your moves for this week?
Yep. So bit of an interesting week this week, Brian, with the late outs there that I had to hit reverse on. So 1282 as it stands at the moment. I VC'd Reece Walsh and I rolled the dice with Nathan Cleary with the captaincy this week. So maybe he'll unicorn up with a few more there, which would be good. Was planning on Latrell Mitchell this week. So I was originally doing AJ Brimson to Latrell. I ended up last minute going just with a bit of a heart pick with Reece Walsh. I think he's pretty attractively priced. He was in the low sixes. When Reece is playing, he's scoring pretty good points. He hasn't scored a huge amount of tries this year, so I just thought, you know what, if he can just get in try scoring mode, he could be anything. Towards the end of the year here, I think the Broncos are in a really good form. I think he's not a bad one to have. And I went Tino Fa'asuamaleaui to Payne Haas, and obviously Payne Haas didn't score amazingly well. I thought he'd probably play bigger minutes than he did, so maybe the injury concerns there is a bit more of a real thing than we had originally thought. So in terms of the next week, Latrell Mitchell and either Valentine Holmes or David Fafita, if I have the money, is probably going to be my next two. I've got 4 trades left, so I can do those 2 this week and hope that works out well for me. So at fullback, I'll roll Latrell Mitchell and Reece Walsh, although Gutho's still pumping out pretty good scores there. So he's a risky trade out, but I think the upside of Latrell Mitchell is too good to ignore. And I think the only other thing I was going to say is the way the Knights are going, Brian, and Ponga kicking, he's nearly a captaincy option week in, week out at this point, as well as the 2 big halfbacks and probably a few of the fullbacks. I think he's back in that point scoring vein for Supercoach purposes, isn't he?
Oh, 100%. I think if Latrell wasn't playing the Tigers next week, I'd be heavily considering it. But there has not been a call that we've made. As I said, there's been some horrible ones, AdamDewey.com, but there's been some horrible calls we've made. But yeah, that is probably our best call of the year. Is like not only Ponga, like I'm sure we weren't the only ones. Like there was heaps of people who were on him, getting back to fullback and all that kind of stuff. But even from an injury risk perspective, and then when we were able to sort of jump on him from a Supercoach perspective, and then ride him through those bye periods and stuff like that, he has just gone from strength to strength and is in worldy form at the moment. So I'm loving seeing it. I scored 12.45, so I'm a worse bloke than you this week, which is no surprise. I went Cole Kuhun. I'm probably getting that wrong. The second row forward from the Sharks, just as a downgrade, and then went up to Haas. I was going to bring in Latrell as well. I've only got 2 trades left. One is for Latrell, and I'm going to hold the other because I'm running with Sonny Luke as my backup hooker to Harry Grant. So I need to have one just in case Grant goes down. But other than that, I think I've got 21, 22 pretty solid starters week in, week out. And then even this Cole Cahoon, he scored, I think it was 50 or 60, today. So if he can keep that up, not that the left side defensively was all that good, but yeah, if he can keep that up, he certainly looked better than Wade Graham, I'll put it that way. So hopefully he can hang on to that. But with 2 trades left, I'm just getting in Latrell, and I'm in the top 1,000 at the moment, so hanging on for dear life, just hoping my point of difference $1 million Scotty Drinkwater can have a few big weeks for me, because that's probably
he's delivering the goods for you, and long may it stay, because it's good to watch.
100%. It's just so good watching the Cows every week and seeing him absolutely tear it up. He's just such a good watch. I probably wish I held SJ just a little bit so I could watch those two sort of go at it. And then, I think the other one, which just quickly before we go, it's really sounding like Pappy's really close to being back.
Yeah.
And so I'm just forewarning you, mate, if we can get any sort of indication about when Pappy's coming back, we are going to that game, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's on the sunny coast, if he's coming back through Carp, then I'll give you one of my Falcons jerseys, and we'll go there and get on the hill and have a few schooners, I reckon.
Love it, mate. All right, guys, that is a wrap for this week. If you like the pod, give us a review, recommend to a friend, all that kind of stuff. If you want more info like this, patreon.com/NRLphysio. Head to Bundy Mixer, get involved, get into our league. It'll be a great place to be. Otherwise, James, have a good week, mate. Hopefully I roll you in the Bundy Mixer next week. And, other than that, I think, stay safe out there, mate. You've been shunned outside, so hopefully not. You don't spend too long in the doghouse.
That's right. 2 things I love is absolutely pumping you in the Bundy Mixer and Bundy rum. So I'm going to be enjoying those two things for the next few weeks, Brian. Trust me.
Love it, guys. All right, and up the mighty Redcliffe Dolphins.